Good morning, everyone, and apologies for starting a touch late, but I hope we can, we will try to finish on time, but if the discussion keeps going, we might run just over 5 minutes into a coffee break, but not longer than that. First of all, a very warm welcome to everyone. The second panel session will focus on looking at overcoming barriers to successful employment of people with disabilities. And I hope that both the speakers and the discussion that will follow will focus on looking, first of all, at measures that may help us to succeed quicker and more efficiently into fulfilling the Article 27, looking at what member states, but also the non-governmental organizations, the private sector, which I'm very happy we have on the panel today, can learn from each other. So it's great to see so many different representatives of different countries here. And I think last but not least, what the services, different services can do to help us into smoother transitions from into employment. Format of our morning session. We will start with myself and a very short presentation. I was asked to present and share with you some of the key figures of employment with people with disabilities in Europe. And I'm not going to be long because some of the speakers have already touched upon it yesterday. After that, we will have a brief presentations, two presentations that will share with us some of the highlights and some of the main points that were discussed at the yesterday parallel sessions. And after that, we will have 4 distinguished speakers that we will have about 15 minutes to talk about their main points that they would like to put across, and I will be introducing them as they come and present. So if we move, if that's okay with you, if we move to my very short intervention, I was asked to just share with you some of the key results of looking at the rates of people with disabilities. And in doing so, I was looking at the very recently published results of the ad hoc module of Labour Force Survey. And I'm sure many of you have already done this exercise, and I think Mark and a couple of other people were remarking yesterday how difficult it is to come across reliable and comparable data. And you will see in the ad hoc modules we have no less than 7 different definitions of disability. But I think for me, but also for many others, I think we cannot stress enough the importance of data, because if we're talking about improving the situation, it is very important to know what is the status quo. As I was saying, when we look at the LFS looks at the working age population, so it covers everyone between age of 15 and 64. There are a number of different definitions that LFS uses, but I think for the purpose of the meeting today, for me at least the most appropriate is the one that looks at the limitations that prevent people with disabilities working, and it's measured by number of different indicators. It's measured by the number of hours someone can work, the type of work that the person can do, and it's also looking at the issues of easiness or getting to or from work. I'm going to skip these. Mark already yesterday touched upon the labor market situations from the EU perspective, and as he rightly pointed out, when we look at the average at the EU level, we see that only 38% of people with disabilities are in employment, taking into account this definition, as opposed to 68% of people without disabilities. But for me, this statistic misses a very important group, and I think in general when we talk about the debate of employment and unemployment, we tend to forget an enormous group that falls into inactivity. And these are all the people with disabilities, but without disabilities too, that are outside the labor market, that they do not feature in statistics. We know that these different schemes are very passive. They have very little activation attached to it. They're very medicalized. And I think if you look at the figure that over 54% of people with disabilities are inactive, labeled as inactive, as opposed to only 25% of people without disabilities, from a policy perspective, I think this is really a huge, huge challenge. I know that we talked yesterday that maybe it's not so wise, or perhaps we should only focus at the EU, but what I did is I did look at some different countries, and the choice of countries, there is nothing behind it. I just thought we do some countries that perform well, some countries that do not perform that well. I also looked at the nationalities of my panel. I thought I would pick up some countries here, and of course I took Latvia, because we're here. And if you look here, the bar on the far right, this is Sweden. Sweden, also Switzerland, by the way, looks quite good. 62% of people with disabilities are in employment. On the left-hand side, we have Bulgaria. I think quite a challenging situation is in Ireland. Only 22% of people with disabilities are in employment. Slovakia, UK also, we see here 36% of people with disabilities in employment. Latvia, on the other hand, maybe because of historical or other reasons, here the employment rate is fairly high compared to other countries. It stands at 41%. I think it's also very important to look at the different dates at the age distribution. And I think here we have two groups which for me are, their situation is fairly difficult. On one hand, we have those in the age bracket 55 to 64, and we can see that only 25% of those people with disabilities are in employment. And the second group is young people, and we have talked about it, and I think we look at the challenge of youth unemployment, and here we can clearly see that young people with disabilities do face a dual disadvantage because of their age, but because also of their disability. If we look at the, I think, other distribution which is interesting is looking at the gender dimension. And I think it has been already mentioned yesterday that in most countries it seems that men tend to have higher employment rates than women. The only exception, again, in the countries that I have looked at is Latvia, where by far it is the women that have a higher employment rates than men. And now, just to finish off, just because I was mentioning the challenge of inactivity, which I think for me it is very important, here I pulled out some figures looking at activity rates. So those people that are in employment, that are unemployment, that are active and ready to be included in the labor market. And again, you can see here that for more countries this seems to be an issue. The country which, again, I think looks fairly satisfactory, even though I know that there is a lot of work going on, is Sweden. 62% of people between age of 15 to 64 are active. But again, you have Bulgaria, you have, again, Ireland, where only 28% of people with disabilities are active, as opposed to 70% of people without disabilities. So again, you have UK, Latvia, again, scoring slightly better than. And here again, just this is my last slide, looking at the age composition, and here we can see that when we look at the activity rate, it's really the older people, those age of 55 plus, which are struggling and are inactive. We have 29% of those with disabilities that are in the category of active, as opposed to 58% of those without disabilities. If you haven't done so yet, I would definitely recommend to browse through the ad hoc module results, because they are very rich and they are very interesting. You can find out a lot about the education. You can find out a lot of information about employment and the different sectors, etc. Bearing, of course, in mind that there are big challenges related to the definition. but notwithstanding, I think it is a very useful resource. So that really is all from me, and now I'm very happy to have a panel, and first of all we will go to the two rapporteurs from the two sessions. I will start with Mrs. Dovilė Juodkaitė, the president of the Lithuanian Forum of Disability, who will share with us the main points from the session one. Thank you.
Hello everybody, thank you very much. Microphone. Yes, hello everybody. Thank you very much for giving me the space to debrief yesterday's session 2 on inclusive education, doing away with barriers. And it is a very challenging task for me because we had a very, very fruitful and rich with information, discussion, and experiences and practices, activities from the speakers, from the panel of 1.5 hours, and now I have to brief in 5 minutes, but I will try. We had a moderator, Mrs. Irena Kowalczyk-Kedziora, representative from the Council of Europe, and she, first of all, she explained what is the main aim of the session, to come with some conclusions, recommendations to self-reliance and participation of persons with disabilities, to discuss about the inclusive education as both the precondition and the major factor of social inclusion, both at the school years as well as later on throughout the year. But we also discussed that the inclusive education is not only the precondition for the later on social inclusion, but it is as a human rights as such and should be realized in its own way. The moderator raised 3 main questions for the panel and for the speakers to cover and to respond to. And the first question was, what is and what means inclusive education in the reality of the within the national states? Because in fact, sometimes inclusive education is a nice package, nice name of the old segregated educational systems that we see. Another question was, what are the systematic barriers that we still face? Because we know that there is a long way already of the legal framework, starting from the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and finishing, of course, with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that says that inclusive education is and should be provided for all the children with disabilities. So why we are still talking about this and what are systematic barriers for this? And then to come, of course, to some list of top 3-5 actions as outcomes, what we should do for inclusive education to become a reality. So the speakers of the panel were very honorable participants. Ms. Nevena Peneva from the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, and Ms. Nevena presented the very recent research of the FRA on violence and hostility against children with disabilities, including in the schooling settings. And of course, it was shown throughout the research the existing evidences of the widespread violence against children with disabilities, the main challenges, and also what to do for the persons with disabilities not to be such a vulnerable group and not to get into the situation of the violence and hostility. And the main the results or the main findings were that there are general frameworks for protection against violence, but those general policies are weak and not very specific enough to cover children with disabilities and to tackle violence against them, and that there are no practical and specific measures how to address children with disabilities in general protective schemes. So Also, there were some challenges mentioned, like lack of training for professionals, lack of very specific training, as well as this leads to lack of competence, lack of awareness about the disability, and sometimes not even willingness to cover the disability within the general educational settings. Also there were very great measures provided to prevent violence against children, as an example from different countries, such as for instance, from Slovenia, the awareness campaign raising, starting and tackling stereotypes and prejudices against disabilities while teaching or introducing disabilities for the school children within the schools, raising awareness to understand boundaries, stay safe, personal safety skill program from Ireland, and some other good practices. The second presenter within the panel was Ms. Victoria Soriano, Assistant Director, European Agency for Development in Special Needs Education. And this is an independent and self-governing organization established by member countries. And this organization really tries to help and support the countries, the ministries of education, how to come to the inclusive education, what to change, what kind of changes there should be. And of course, it was said that inclusive education is the best option if adequate conditions exist, first of all, which means, of course, sufficient resources, well-trained and motivated education and support staff, accessibility of the physical environment and the building, accessible technical aids and support, adequate educational support, good counseling throughout the school education. So all these conditions should be in place in order to have the inclusive education. And it was also as a conclusion that the real vision of inclusive education is inclusive education as a quality approach for all learners, based on the guidelines, guiding principles of equity and quality for all. The third presenter within the panel was Ms. Carla Bonino, and she introduced the included network of the multi-stakeholder community and network and multi-instrument to advocate for inclusive education. This network also presents identifies and disseminates good practices to promote inclusive education. It built good practice criteria and compiled good practices within their websites. They also do present studies and visits for the inclusive education to promote it, and also advocates on the European level for inclusive education to become reality. And the fourth presenter was the director of European Disability Forum, Ms. Catherine Norton, and she introduced the assistive technologies to promote the inclusive education. And the main, of course, the main idea was that, of course, assistive technologies are not the main barrier themselves, but they can be enormous facilitator to support and overcome other barriers that people and children with disabilities face in accessing and realizing their inclusive education right. So to conclude, really, and to answer those three questions that moderator raised in the first place, we concluded that inclusive education is still more an exception than the reality and the daily practice. And the first question, what is inclusive education? We kind of also defined that inclusive schooling is the place for all learners to know, to do, and to be together. and it should be guided by the principles of equity and equality for all, because the diversity is beneficial to all, both learners with disabilities but also learners without disabilities. And the teachers should be also teaching not only the object or topic that they teach, but also all the learners that benefit from the knowledge. As mentioned, it requires adequate conditions. All participants should have positive attitudes towards inclusive education, and this should be also good communication, values, very important leadership, clear protocols for the inclusive education to be a reality. As a systematic barrier...
I'm sorry, could we start concluding?
The systematic barrier was mentioned that it is perception of educational approach towards curricula, approach to the curricula that is content-led, but it should be more also on the individual needs and social learning. Three main actions, 5 actions to come to the inclusive education was, first of all, awareness raising, sensitization towards people with disabilities, towards children with disabilities, also enlarging the scope of people involved in education, because education is not only educational setting, but all the surrounding and the accessibility should be in place. And of course, training of staff professionals, and not only short-term training, but changing their motivations and approaches to the teaching of all learners instead of teaching the topic. And of course, promoting accessibility and accessible equipment, techniques and environment for all is also the precondition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive, and I'm sure the speakers will also want to touch upon some of the key questions. I would plead that we do stick to our time, because we're eating into the time of the next speakers. We will now move to Bronisław Mamojka, who is the president of the Slovak Disability Forum, and will share with us the main points discussed.
Good morning. One of your colleagues to read my report, so thank you.
Of course, that's not an issue. And where is the person that took on themselves to convene the message? Well, if not, I will then we can come back to it in a search of not wasting time. I will move to Gunta Anke, and she will have a presentation in English, but will be speaking in Latvian. So please make sure that you have the headphones. And Mrs. Gunta has been a long-standing campaigner for issues of disability and equality, is vice president of the European Disability Forum, but is also a very active member of the European Economic and Social Committee, and is here with us to share some of their work that they have been doing, and they have been very active in this area. Your floor is yours.
Mm-hmm. Good morning, everybody, and as moderator said already, I'm going to speak Latvian because it's just a great possibility for me to speak Latvian in my own country. So, dear friends and dear colleagues, just a little bit more about flexibility, about employment and people with disabilities. Moderatore, tikko.
The moderator just named quite many statistical data, provided quite many new statistical data. My presentation also includes some of this data that I will try to go through very quickly so that we can save some time. But at the same time, I thought that it would be important to mention them because this data is short and very easy to understand. If we speak about employment, I believe it's very important to speak about Europe 2020 strategy and its main goals. And of course, employment is one of its main goals, stipulating that at least 75% of all the Europeans in the age group from 20 to 64 have to be employed. If we go further, I would like to provide some numbers. Currently, there are 80 million people in the EU that have a disability. As it was just mentioned by the moderator, it's very difficult to understand how many of them exactly are, because as we know, there is no common notion of what is a disability in the European Union. But if we look at this number, we see that 1 in 8 people in the working age have a disability or maybe has a chronic condition or disease. 78% of these people with severe disabilities which are in the working age are not part of the labor market, which means that they don't work. Well, 50% of the people with disabilities that have acquired their disabilities during their working lives return to their work, return to the labor market quite rarely. If we look at Latvia, we have 117,000 people with disabilities in Latvia. That's according to the latest statistics. This was just a short introduction to describe the current situation with regards to the employment in Europe. But now I would like to provide some practical or maybe theoretical information why this situation is as it is. And we have to return to the main barriers that I see in the employment sector. This is a research carried out in May 2012. There are 5 or 6 main barriers that people with disabilities face. First, lack of education or training. And this is what we just heard in the report of yesterday's working group, that the situation really is as this. There is a lack of professional and social education. And we also heard that the teachers have to be trained to teach not only the content, the topic, but they have to teach the children how to live. There is a lack of understanding of the needs of the people with disabilities, the needs of these people from the point of view of the employers. Quite often, there is a lack of specific adjustments in the working environment so that people can work according to their condition. We also spoke about the lack of accessibility. The working environment is inaccessible, which prevents these people from finding the jobs. We also speak about inadequate synthesis between benefits and the employment, namely, if the employment is in the focus of the state's attention. Here, maybe I have to mention the word balance. Yes, on the one hand, we support this person, but on the other hand, we ask or make this person to work. And the last barrier is the disability of the respective person. This is just logical. When I was asked to speak during this conference, I was asked to pay special attention to a notion called flexicurity, as it is called in Europe. It's like a European jargon. So what do we understand by this? This is an amalgamation of 2 things, safety and flexibility. And we see that it consists of 4 basic steps, which we have to consider in the employment context as such, and when we speak about persons with disabilities. So, we have to think about flexible contracts and ways to provide to the people. The second important aspect is the lifelong learning. People cannot learn everything during the short period of time when they go to school. They have to continue their education, their professional education, social education, and lifelong learning is a huge opportunity if we make it accessible to people with disabilities. It is also very important to speak about effective and active labor market policies, and I believe it is very important to underline, as it was mentioned by our moderator, that it is that the number of inactive people is very large, and these people are outside of the labor market not because they can't work, but because they have become inactive. As we know that the longer the person is not working, the lower the chances that this person will ever return to the labor market. And the last aspect, if we speak about flexicurity, relates to modern, adequate, and compliant, appropriate social support systems. And it's very important to remember that these support systems are required to support the people instead of the activization of these people, making them stay at home and doing nothing. If we speak about people with disabilities, I would like to point out that these people differ. And this is a depiction on how we see their differences. This is a star. It's a 5-pointed star, and each point of the star has a particular disability. You see physical disabilities, deafness, blind people, people with learning disabilities, or people with psychosocial disabilities. And in this illustration, at the very narrowest point, you see people with the severest of disabilities. If we look at people with physical disabilities, these are the people that probably can't even sit. They lie down for the whole of the day, or they need enormous support to be able to move. But these people are very few in number. But if we move downwards, we see that the point becomes wider, and the number of these people is larger, but their disabilities are not so severe. So if we move closer to the center, we can speak of people who maybe need some walking aids, but they can walk, or maybe they don't need any aids at all, and they can move almost without any problems. And in the center, we have people with no disabilities, with no problems. They can see, speak, walk, or do whatever they wish. So if we indicate with these red lines the borderline between the disability and no disability, then we see that some people who are inside of this circle or inside of this line can receive general or mainstream services, which means that they can use public transport, public regular schools, and many other things. But there are quite a few with severe disabilities that will need specific support to use these services, for example, in the labor market. These groups differ a lot, and the star demonstrates that the further these people are placed in the points of the star, the greater the difference between them, and the greater the difference between the services that they need, because you will understand it very well that the services provided to blind people cannot be just provided to the deaf people because they have different needs. These are just a few examples. If we speak about the physical disability, it is very important to speak about accessibility and technical aids. In case of deaf people, sign language is important, and accessible informative environment is important. In case of other disabilities, various supportive technologies are important, as well as accessible environment. In case of learning disabilities, we have to think about inclusive education and support services that help these people deal with everyday activities, including the employment. But in case of psychosocial disabilities, it is very important to think about support teams, about what can help these people to be included in the real life. Here I demonstrated to what extent disabilities differ, but I believe there are three main aspects that we have to remember when we speak about employment and disabilities, and which are important, relevant for all types of disabilities, irrespective of what disability the person has. The first and most important is the specificity of the respective disability. The second aspect, the services with regards to employment have to be provided on timely basis. They have to be provided when the person needs these services, not in 3 years when this person will never be able to return or be ready to be part of the labor market. And we also have to speak about sustainability, because probably I have bad experiences with regards to these services. For example, as soon as the project ends, the service is suspended. And no matter how good the service was, how wonderful it was, there is no money, and the people are just left outside of the service, and most often also outside of the labor market, just because the project is over. And in the last slide, as I do not want to spend too much time, I wanted to list the most important aspects or mechanisms that Europe relies on to employ people with disabilities. There are 5 of them. First, subsidized workplaces, which means that people with disabilities are employed, receiving their wages or salaries from the state, fully or partially, and these subsidies are paid to the employer to compensate the loss caused by the disability. It's a good approach with many positive aspects, but at the same time this approach differs greatly in the member states, and it's quite difficult to prove, to demonstrate the size of this loss. And the formula used to calculate this loss is very complicated. There are also supported jobs, which means that a group of people, most often in cases of people with intellectual disabilities, these people have an assistant that accompanies these people to the respective job, trying to help these people to understand what they really have to do. This is a very convenient way, but also a very expensive way, because you basically have to pay for 2 employees. One of them is the new employee, the person with disability, and the second person is the assistant, who also receives a salary. The next option are special workshops. They were created a long time ago, and these workshops were mostly intended for the blind and the deaf people. Currently, we are moving away from this approach because it's a very segregated environment, and I believe that none of us would ever wish to be put in a workshop, in a job, because we have a specific feature. For example, the size of our feet is number 39 European size. And the same refers to people with disabilities. They don't want to be placed in a specific employment because they are in a wheelchair or because they are deaf. Another system is the so-called quota system, which has been discussed greatly. And I don't think there are any right or wrong answers here. On the one hand, there are quite many negative comments because people don't want to be a quota and they don't want to be part of the labor market just because they are disabled. But on the other hand, this is maybe a coercive mechanism for the employer to hire a person with disability, later maybe to notice that it is not as bad as it seems at the beginning. And the last mechanism is various support to the employer to hire people with disabilities as part of the general labor market. These are the main tools currently used in Europe. And all the safety requirements have to be attributed to these tools, which would mean that we could help people with disabilities to find jobs easier. I think that colleagues will dwell on these issues as well. And by this, I would like to say thank you for your attention. And also, I would like to add that unemployment is still like a fish in a fish tank. It's far away, it's wet and difficult to get, but we still can try.
Thank you very much, Gunda. I think a couple of points that you've raised are very interesting. I think you've pointed out the heterogeneity of people with disabilities, but also the heterogeneity of the labor market, that it's fundamental to understand when we talk about inclusion. And I think the glue of it is the services. And I think the services that are also heterogeneous and the way that they are designed, managed, and I think very importantly funded on how sustainable they are is crucial. And I think that leads us very nicely to Luke, the Secretary General of EASPD, who will share with us some of the thoughts and I'm sure some of the main challenges that the different services are facing currently. Luke, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for these nice words, nice introduction. I also would like to thank the organizers for organizing this very important event because indeed inclusive education and labor market participation are absolutely essential if we want to further develop an inclusive society. Together with you, I will explore a bit what the role of support providers might be in the future, and I also will share some models of good practice with you. Maybe first a few words about EASPD. EASPD is a European association of organizations that try to be of support providers. We represent around 11,000 now, and more than 3,000 of these organizations are providing employment-related support, different types of support, different types of interventions. Next year we celebrate our 20th anniversary, and the overarching objective of EASPD is the correct implementation of the UN Convention, especially those articles which are of importance for support providers, and that means for us mainly, apart from others of course, Article 19, living in the community, 24, inclusive education, and 27, employment. How do we try to organize our work? It is structured along 3 pillars: information, innovation, and impact. We try to inform our colleagues active at grassroots level on what is going on in Strasbourg and in Brussels. And we try to inform Strasbourg and Brussels about what is going on at the grassroots level. We try to voice the concerns of the field, of the sector, and we invest a lot in innovation. We are involved, take part in many, many projects that try to facilitate and promote innovation, all linked to the correct implementation of the UN Convention. And quite often support providers ask me, what does the convention mean for us, for support providers, for organizations that want to be of support? And I always summarize that then in a one-liner. It's a bit demagogic, I know, but it gives a strong message, I think. In the past, we brought people to the support. segregating solutions, special schools, sheltered workshops, residential centers. The challenge for the future is to bring the support to the people in the communities, where the people live, where they want to work, where they want to participate in education, to learn, to develop their skills, and so on. So that is the challenge we have to face. We look today at one element, and that is employment. And we all know that employment is crucial because it is part of our identity. Our job is part of that what makes what we are. When you, maybe yesterday evening, introduced yourself to a colleague, you for sure said something about where you are from, the country you're from. For sure you said something whom you live with. And the third element we always give about our identity is what we do for a living. It's important for all of us, so it's also of crucial importance for persons with a disability. Let's not forget what successful employment is. It is defined by Article 27 of the UN Convention. It is about freely chosen work with real contracts, workers' rights, a decent job, correct remuneration, and on the open labor market. And here we have to face, I think, and it was said already by the previous speaker, here we have to face a very important challenge. Let's not forget that around 3 million Europeans are involved in the work or are supported by sheltered and in-sheltered workshops. And sheltered workshops became a sort of a container concept. There is not one given clear definition of what a sheltered workshop is. From country to country, the definitions are different, the concepts are different. So we should be very careful when discussing sheltered workshops. And I think that we should be very careful with stopping this type of support. We have to move away from it, that's clear. But we should not dump people without support on the open labor market, because as it is for deinstitutionalization, moving away from large segregating institutions, we have to make sure that the alternative is available before we start to dismantle what is there at the moment. The previous speaker already addressed a few of the barriers. I will not go into depth of what was mentioned already, but I would like to highlight one or two other barriers. One of the problems is, and that was discussed a few days ago in Zadar, where we had our employment conference. Not less than 350 delegates from all over Europe were there to discuss how to make the labor market more inclusive. Representatives of DPOs, employers, businesses, authorities, and support providers. And one of the main barriers that were identified was that we still focus on disability, on the defect, instead of focusing on abilities and on what people can bring to an enterprise, to a business, to an undertaking. Second element, indeed, it was mentioned already several times, low quality education and problems with regard to access to good quality education and vocational education and training. Third problem, accessibility. It was already discussed by the previous speaker. Another key barrier is the benefit trap. Work must pay. If we want people to take to a certain extent the risk to go into that labor market, then we must also make sure that there are decent working conditions and that work indeed pays. A lack of holistic support was also identified as a key problem. When we look at the employment of persons with a disability, then we also have to look at transport facilities, the accessibility of recruitment, information and strategies, the workplace, and so many other elements. If we focus on only one of the elements, then the entire effort might get lost. Last point, we keep on using a blaming language. We keep on talking about people far away from the labor market. And that, in fact, makes the person responsible for the distance to this labor market, while quite often the labor market is far away from the people. We should not see the labor market as a sort of a monolithic thing that cannot be managed. We can create jobs, we can do job carving, putting parts and pieces of tasks and jobs together into a package that fits to the set of abilities of a person, whether it is a person with a disability or not. Many of us already brought in some statistics. We have new data now. For me, there is only one element that we should not forget. And maybe fundamental rights agencies and human rights experts should look into that. All countries in Europe have systems that declare certain groups of people unable to work. And that means that they disappear from the statistics. That is a huge problem, and I think that there is a problem with regard to Article 27 of the UN Convention. There, declaring people unable to work might be not in line with the values and principles of the Convention. Another element which I would like to bring up here is that we see a growing awareness in the business world. In Zadar, we brought together 10 models of good practice, and you can find this information on our website. We even had the opportunity to give some employment awards to some businesses and organizations active in the field. One of the nominated enterprises, Credit Suisse, which is a quite big player, even proposed to set up a network where employers that want to work with persons with a disability can exchange their methods, their practices, their ideas. So maybe this is something we should pick up, and I'm sure that my colleague from the ILO is very interested in this type of proposals as well, because you try to do something similar, I think. Another point which is worth to be looked at is a remark coming from those that provide employment support, NGOs or public agencies. Quite often, the hardest place to get a person with a disability employed is within public authorities, municipalities, governments, administrations. There seems to be a huge barrier there, because quite often recruitment techniques and methods are very bureaucratic and very rigid. So maybe we should look at that, and maybe we should invite authorities to lead by example. I would like to share with you, I brought with me also a star, as the previous speaker did. I also brought a star with me, a 4-point star in this case. I would like to share with you 4 key success factors we identified, comparing 25 European projects, looking at research available, and discussing what works and what didn't work over the last years. And I hope that also the Commission will take these success factors into consideration when they further develop the new strategy on long-term unemployed. I hope that there will be attention in that new strategy for persons with a disability as well. First point of my star is stakeholder cooperation, the S of stakeholder cooperation. It seems to be absolutely crucial to have all actors at the table when developing successful strategies. Of course, representatives of DPOs, but also authorities, employers, professionals should be at the table when developing strategies. And I think that there is a very important coordinating role here of employment agencies, be it NGOs or public. It is important that there is a body taking up the responsibility to cooperate the development of strategies and approaches. What my sector should bring in, what the support providers should bring in, is the knowledge and know-how that is accumulated over the last decades. Of course, we should not forget that also DPOs can bring in very essential and crucial know-how and information. And I think that here there could be a very important role further developed by the European institutions. They could help the sector to set up the needed platforms where we can meet the business world, the enterprises, and can further develop our approaches. Second point of the star is the T of targeted actions. What we need is targeted actions in the mainstream. Actually, we are discussing now the third generation of policies. The first generation, developed in the 50s and the 60s, was the segregating solutions, sheltered workshops. The second generation was, let's trust the mainstream, they will solve all the problems. The third generation is about developing individualized answers in the mainstream, one at a time, individualized solutions, because even going a bit further than the star presented by the previous speaker, we should not think in groups, we should not think in categories, we should think in what a person can bring to an enterprise, what a person can bring to an undertaking, and make sure that there is a good match between what the employer wants and what a certain person can bring to this business, to this enterprise. Individualized approaches are needed, and that is one way to develop successful strategies. Of course, again, the benefit trap should be looked at, and one of the models that was presented in Zadar a few days ago is how we can include a disability perspective in job fairs that are organized. If you want to learn more about that, feel free to visit the website of ESPD. You can find more information on that model there. Do I still have 2-3 minutes? 3, okay, thank you. Oh, even more than what I expected. Thank you very much. The next point of the star is availability of support. If the support is not available for both key players, the employee and the employer, it risks to go wrong. The employer might need information on how to modify the workplace, on how to deal with the administration and the bureaucratic red tape, how to organizing job carving, which is a very successful methodology that we can use. What is available as funding instruments to support the employment and to compensate maybe lost in production. Equally, the employee with special support needs might need support, specific training, help with regard to understanding the information that is provided, support with regard to administration, and so on. So the availability of support is a key success factor, and that is where support providers come into the picture, I think. Just one figure. We have data available proving that there is a return on investment of 1 to 4 for each euro invested in support to these both categories. The return on investment is 4 euro. So the success is, I think, quite clear. Last point of my star is we should develop strategies and policies based on evidence. It was discussed already by Mark, representing ANET here, and by many others. Comparability of the data is a problem. Success factor analysis should be done, and there is indeed still a lot of research to be done with regard to reasonable accommodation. Just naming some of the elements where I think DG Research and the Horizon, the new Horizon 2020 program could be of help to further promote successful employment in the field. Conclusions. What we aim at is clear. Article 27, employment on the open labor market, decent jobs for people that allow them to develop a career path and that helps them to stay out of this very dangerous mixture of poverty and disability. We should not forget that successful employment is the result of successful inclusion. You cannot have employment on the open labor market if you don't have inclusive education, if you don't have participation in cultural life, in political life, in all the other aspects of life. Successful employment is factor of successful inclusion, and the other way around. And the other way around. We have to move away from a blaming language and blaming policies, and I think we should develop a multi-layered approach which could be summarized in STAR. We as support providers are available to do this, and we should never forget why it is so important. Job, employment is part of our identity. So it is for persons with a disability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luke. I think a couple of great points. I think you may have solved the ongoing battle between targeted and vis-a-vis mainstream, which many member states face. And I do like the approach of targeted approach within the mainstream environment. One thing which strikes me we haven't yet mentioned when we talk about jobs and employment, and especially when we talk about decent work, and maybe that's something that we can talk during the discussion, is the role of trade unions. I mean, do we see them as, because they are a crucial partner on the labor market, as some stakeholder that could be used, if you like, to improve the situation once people are in employment? But that's something maybe for later. But now we're moving to Henrik Moller from ILO, and Luke has indeed mentioned that you are a person behind the fairly new, if I may say, global business and disability network that has been created by ILO, driven by your employers group, which really aims at stimulating and exchanging of employers directly on these issues. Please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. And first of all, let me also, like Luc, extend the thanks to the organizers of this important event, and thank you very much for inviting the ILO to come here and present on some of the work that we are doing on disability inclusion. And on this point, I'm underlining that it's some sort of, or part of the work that we are doing on disability inclusion, because what I will be focusing on here, that is a recent initiative that we have been putting together over the past 5 years, focusing specifically on business and business engagement in disability inclusion. But this is certainly not the only type of initiatives that we have ongoing in the ILO. There has been a range of work, I mean, dating back very many years, in all sorts of labor market institutions, here under also the trade unions that have been very active partners in the past and still are today in the different forms of work that we have on disability inclusion. So what I was just seeking to say here is that for those of you who are not so familiar with the ILO, I mean, the ILO is the UN institution focusing on labor market issues in all its different aspects. In common day-to-day language, what is usually referred to in the ILO is the notion of decent work. So, I mean, it's decent work, decent working conditions, employment, social protection, etc., in all its different forms, I mean, with all the labor market institutions. Within that, disability is one element. It's also one element among many different elements. But it's also an element that has what I would call a historic dimension in the ILO. I think if we dig into the archives of the ILO, we would find the first committees and the work on disability done back in the 1920s. So, I mean, it's a history that is coming close to 100 years of working with disability issues in the ILO. What is much more recent in terms of the disability work, that is with a particular focus on business. And I think there are, of course, many different reasons for why you embark on something that is new. But, I mean, let me just give you some of the few things that I think kind of led to that the ILO embarked on this journey in terms of setting up a network of this sort. One of the things that was what Luc was mentioning, there is a growing awareness within the business community. CSR reporting, CSR initiatives is something that is being seen and being considered and being given much more importance now than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and certainly if you go further back, I mean much less than that. This is something that we although it's not to a very great extent, but it's something that is beginning to include disability inclusion. Another aspect that was coming up and has been coming up more or less at the same time, I think there are two aspects. One of them has been mentioned consistently throughout the day yesterday. Luc was also referring to it, and that's the UN CRPD with its Article 27 on employment. There are some very specific elements there. And of course, this is something that is coming back to the business community, coming back to enterprises in terms of what do we do about this? How do we go about that within our particular structures, within our entities, within our enterprises? A third element that I just want to mention, because I mean it was not referred to at all yesterday, but I think it's an element that is important, and certainly if we talk wider in the business community, I think it's something that is becoming the reference framework. This is what is called the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, also often referred to as the John Ruggie Framework, which was an undertaking over a few years and which was published in 2011, and which is, I think it's fair to say, the reference framework today in terms of business responsibilities vis-à-vis human rights issues. Within that, I mean, I'm not sure whether disability is mentioned, but I mean, as has been consistently said, I mean, disability is about human rights, disability is about non-discrimination, disability is about inclusion. So, I mean, in the whole structure of it, I mean, it's certainly part and parcel of this. So much about the past of it. Let me just very quickly jump to some of the things that we are doing in the network. In the membership, as I said, I mean, it's a business network. That does not mean that it's a closed club or anything of that. I'll give you the website links at the end of my presentation. And essentially, all the materials we have done, all the case studies we have done, all the publications we have done, that is something that is available for the public, because it's something that we think is extremely important to share widely, both within the business community, but certainly also outside of the business communities in terms of what it is that we do. So in terms of membership of the network, we have a range of multinational enterprises that are part of the network. We have a range of employers' organizations or business networks. It's typically national employers' organizations or national business networks that are part of it. And then we have what we call selected DPOs. And it's either that is represented within the ILO, so we also have some direct engagement within the disability community and their organizations, I mean, within this network. Just to underline what I was saying in terms of our membership and put some names on some of the organizations and institutions that we are engaging with, we have a steering committee where we have some 10 seats for the businesses. We have Accor Hotels, it's a French group, multinational, so we have the EU dimension here. We have another couple of European companies within our steering committee, ADECO, which was presenting yesterday from the ADECO CSR Foundation. They have been a very active partner and still today a very active partner in the network. Carrefour and Casino Group, the two big supermarket chains from France. L'Oréal, another French company, is also part of the steering committee. Just to mention also, Telenor, the Norwegian telecommunication company, is also part of the disability network. They are not in the steering committee at this point. I mean, there might be that in the future. And on the employers' organization side, I mean, we have an American chamber with a very extensive network of multinational American enterprises within the steering committee as well. So what do we do in the network? If we just make it into, what would I say, some headlines, it's about sharing knowledges and identifying good practices. It's about developing some products that we see is coming out of the membership as something being within the ILO that is being considered something that we are in the best position to do. And when I'm phrasing it like this, that's because we have really been trying throughout the existence of the network to be very conscious of that there are certain things that we can do in a sort of a global business network, but there are also a great range of things that are much better done either at the company level, at the national level, or in the national network. So we try to be very conscious of which are the things that we should try to pick up with the membership that we have, so we can make kind of a valuable contribution into that. Then what we also seek to do, because as you would see from the names of both the companies and also the business networks, some of them are very professional, capable, and influential organizations. But we also have a dimension within our work of working with either relatively weak national networks or non-existent networks, simply because we also wish to use the experiences, and we are using the experiences we have within the network, either to stimulate the development of national networks, professionalize the networks that are in existence, but still can benefit from some sort of technical assistance, linking up to others, and so on. And that is something that we try to do with the fourth point that have on my slide, that is to try to link this into some wider elements of the work that we are doing in the ILO, that can be either in the forms of policy advice, that can be in the form of technical cooperation projects. So that is kind of in headline format what it is that we try to do in the network. Let me very quickly move on to just illustrate some of the things that we have been doing. And as I was saying early on in my presentation, these documents in full PDF are available on our website. So, I mean, you can simply go in and download them afterwards if it's something that you can find useful. We started out our journey in what I would say a rather straightforward and maybe a bit of a simple manner. We started to document, I mean, a range of company practices. All of them are multinational companies that we knew about and that we learned about were having some very interesting experiences. So we documented 25 company experiences. What we have intended to do in the documentation is to structure it so it's not about comparing one to the other to say that one is better than the other, but it's about to be able to read the case studies from the companies in a manner that you get some consistency in terms of some of the elements that we found were extremely useful coming out of the company experiences. It's about hiring retentions, it's about the products and services they're developing, it's about their CSR initiatives, and the last one I cannot see on the screen, but I can, yeah, that's the last one. That's about corporate social responsibility. Similarly, we went on to document on business organizations and national business networks, what they're doing, and we illustrated 12 national networks. Some of them are very professional, very capable networks with a long history and a range of professional staff. Employers Forum on Disability is one of the networks, if I remember correctly. And some of the others are much more loosely organized business networks, but that are still intending to do things and trying to do things, and within their means and the scope of their work are certainly doing things. Then just moving on to two of the more recent publications, materials, tools that we have been putting together. We have consistently been asked, I mean, whether we could go in and work with companies in terms of assessing their operations. For different reasons, what we have been saying is, I mean, the ILO is not a consultancy agency, so I mean, this is certainly not our role to do. But what we then have tried to do, that is within the policy, the wider policy guidance that we have at our disposal, we have put material together in what we call a self-assessment tool, which is for companies, multinational companies with all their affiliates and all their structures, to make their own assessment, so it's somehow an assessment that is made in line and with the intent of, I mean, the broader guidance that is in existence. So that is a tool that is available, I mean, for companies for doing their own assessments, but then referenced within I mean, the UN CRPD, the Article 27, and together with a number of other elements that are available. The second last publication I just want to make a reference to, that is one we call Business as Usual. It's a piece of documentation that many would find probably a bit more easy to read than the first case studies we did, which were more analytical in nature. But it's really to get the message out to a wider audience with some company practices, with some very illustrative examples of what it is that is going on in terms of disability inclusion today within companies. I think I will leave it at this, also being conscious of the time. That just two additional things that I would mention that we have been engaged in, and one of them is giving a direct lead to our last presenter. But just before that, there's a publication, I'm having it up here, I don't have it on my slide because it's an extremely recent publication, but it should be available on our website, where we have gone into a much more detailed analysis of how companies, how multinational companies are referring to and how they're referring to disability inclusion within their CSR practices. You can read the whole study there. What we essentially found out, there's not that much yet, but I think we have all the expectations that there's much more to come in the future. But there's also much more happening within the companies that they're actually including in their CSR publication. But I mean, if you're interested, I mean, it's a rather detailed study in terms of analysis of what companies are doing. The last thing I just wanted to make a reference to, because it makes a direct link into our last presenter, our steering committee in the first meeting we had in this year in January, there was kind of a request put back to the Secretariat in terms of taking up the issue of mental health. How exactly we are going to do it, that is something that we will be spending the next weeks and months in terms of discussing. Again, here the aim is certainly not to duplicate what is also what is already happening in other types of networks, what is happening within enterprises. But I think, I mean, across our business network, it's one of the emerging important areas of work that the business community needs to be taking up. So I think I would leave it at this and hope that would also be a lead into our last presenter. And if you have any sort of request or anything, do not hesitate. I mean, write to us. The email is on the contact sheet there, or make a visit to our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Henrik. Very useful and very hands-on. And now we will move to our last speaker, and we have spent considerable amount of time talking about the companies and about the networks, so I think it's quite fitting to finish with actually getting a hands-on experience from a company which I hear has been and is extremely active in that field, and you, as a British telecom, keep winning awards and lending your advice. But I think it's very interesting to also hear directly from a company, because I'm sure it's not that plain very easy and very simple. And I think it's very interesting to hear your practical experiencing or how you go about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, and for the build-up, which I'll try to live up to within the time. I will aim to give an overview of what we do within my own company. BT is a communications company. We serve our customers in about 170 countries around the world, and we employ just under 90,000 people. Now 80% of those people are in the UK, so what I say this morning, the principles will apply across all of the company, but some of the specifics will relate only to the UK, because that's where we have the scale to do things that we can't always do elsewhere. We've heard already about the vast numbers of people living with disabilities, and I won't emphasize that anymore. All I would say is that we see ourselves as being a part of that society. We see each and every one of those people with disabilities as a potential customer, and we see many of them as potential employees. Now, BT has been around for a long time. Like most organisations, we change our name on a regular basis to avoid the enemy. And we've been in and out of the public and private sectors several times over the years. But we can claim to be the oldest telephone company in the world. And for a long time, we were part of the Post Office. And it was back in 1880 that the Postmaster General, Henry Fawcett, was a blind person and extremely successful he was too. Within my working lifetime, the last 40-odd years, there has undoubtedly been a change in the language and I think a change in some of the thinking in this area. So whereas we would have spoken when I started off about equal opportunities, then we started talking much more about diversity. And increasingly these days, we talk about inclusion. And perhaps underpinning that has been a build. So building on the legal framework, looking at social responsibility and the place that companies play in the society they operate within, but now increasingly looking at how doing things in this area can convey real business benefits for you as a commercial organisation. And that has helped us to develop our strategy around inclusion and specifically in this context, disability. Our whole company is one which is engaged in trying to create possibilities for our customers. And if you think about the technology that we all routinely use these days, then information technology is really an integral part of our lives, which it wouldn't have been even 30 years ago. What we aim to do is to have a diverse workforce so that we can understand our customers better and serve them better. We believe very firmly that having a diverse workforce allows us to be more innovative, and particularly in the area that we operate in, innovation is a characteristic that we value extremely highly. And what we believe is that if we can operate an inclusive culture within our organisation, then that releases the power to allow our people to really drive the company forward. In terms of the strategy, leadership is always key. We have a main board member who is our inclusion champion. We have a specific senior executive who is the disability champion for the company. We seek to embed inclusion in all aspects to do with disability in all of our policies and processes through the company. And we specifically focus on the attraction, the development, and the retention of our people with disabilities. And we believe that that gives us an inclusive culture that helps us to be successful as a business. In terms of the specifics, a lot of it's around changing attitudes and behaviours. And what we try to do is focus on those 4 areas. We aim to educate and inform. There's a lot of misinformation around disability in general and some aspects in particular. So we produce a wealth of information for our people, which is available to them on our comprehensive intranet. We produce specific fact sheets about certain disabilities. The one that's on the slide there is to do with hearing impairments. There are similar ones to do with visual impairments, chronic illnesses like diabetes, other conditions like Asperger's syndrome. So we try to make sure that our people have the knowledge they need to understand what it means for their colleagues to have a disability. And critically, we make sure that each of those materials is produced in collaboration with somebody who has that lived experience of what it's like wherever possible from within our own workforce. Picking up on the point made earlier, we do work very closely with our trades unions. We have 2 recognised trades unions in the UK. We work very closely with them on this issue. And we also have an employee network, which we call Able2, for people with disabilities. And they are a very vibrant network of well over 1,000 people with disabilities who help us to make sure that we stay grounded when we're looking at our policies and procedures, and indeed, as I'll talk about more about in a minute, in our products. We support our people internally, but we also recognise that we need to buy in external support. We use a range of suppliers. Perhaps the one we use most is an NGO called AVAILIBITY, which focuses on adaptive technology, using technology to allow people to work effectively. And then finally, we seek to normalise disability. As Henrik has said, one of the big issues in our society, we would suggest, but certainly within the company, is mental health. And what we've been trying to do for the last 15 years is destigmatise mental health. And a lot of that is by normalising it, getting across how common these issues are, and making sure that people with disabilities aren't hidden, that they are out there, they do appear in stories in our internal news websites, and that it's just a normal part of being a BT person. We've heard yesterday about accommodations, adjustments as we tend to call them, and we focus very much on the attraction, the development and the retention of our people. Most adjustments, most accommodations really are very simple, they really are very cheap, and reinforcing that message to our line managers is an important part of what we do. In terms of attracting people, we aim to show a friendly face. It's very easy for big organisations to appear very daunting and to put people with disabilities off without even thinking about it. You do have to think about it. You have to plan for how you're going to attract people with disabilities if you want to get them to come and work for you. We then look at our selection and interview processes on a person-by-person basis. We recognise that a standard process won't work for everybody, so we will change it to meet the needs of people who have that requirement. Getting people in is one thing. You then, we believe, have to develop their careers when they are with you. We are a company that is characterised by having long tenure of employment. So perhaps one of the key features there is that we embrace agile working, flexible working in the way that we operate. We have literally thousands of different working patterns within our workforce. The key is that we meet the needs of our customers, but we also aim to meet the needs of our employees. And if we can meet the needs of our customers and the needs of our employees, that's it. Why should we bother about trying to impose anything else? In terms of retention, like most of the telecommunications sector in Europe, we have an ageing population. I know from personal experience, as you get older, things tend not to work as well. And so we spend a lot of time and effort of supporting people who become injured and through injury. And we engage a number of services there to assist with that. This is a complex slide, and I won't go into it in any detail. If people want to catch me at the break afterwards, I'll happily talk about some of the specifics. But the essence of the way that we organise ourselves is that we have a small core team that any person, any manager can come to if they are not coping with making those simple adjustments and they need to do things that are more complex. And that small team will then direct them to a whole range of services and information that we have to support our people. And one of the key things that we found helps is having a disability passport, and that's where people with a disability, if they want to, can complete a passport that outlines what are the issues that they have in doing their job properly, what support do they need in order to do their job effectively, and that goes with them as they move through the organisation. As they move from manager to manager, their passport goes with them. It means there's no surprises for the manager. It means the individual employee has the comfort of knowing that this is something which is documented and officially accepted by the company. We used to have a fantastic, we've got a fantastic CEO now. We used to have a fantastic Dutch CEO who was characteristically blunt, who used to say when you told him about anything, well, so what? Well, the so what for us is that in this last year, we have well outperformed in terms of recruiting people with disabilities, almost 3 times higher than the number we would have expected if we'd just been taking people from the general population. Our Specialist adjustment service that I spoke about, the rather complex wheel service, has been used by over 1,500 of our people in the last year. And our rehabilitation services for people who suffer illness or injury have got 92% of the people back into their own work. If we can't get people back into their own work, then what we do is we support their redeployment to other jobs within the company. And again, we're highly successful in that. And when we look across the company at self-declaration of disability, and we recognise there is under-declaration within the company, 5.6% of our people tell us that they do have a disability. One of the issues in society, I think, is authenticity, that people have a much wider access to information these days than they have ever had before. And I have to say, I think there's a degree of cynicism in society these days that probably wasn't prevalent 20 or 30 years ago. So as an organisation, what you have to do is make sure that what you do internally is congruent with what you do externally. And I won't read everything that's on the slide there, but as a company, what we try to do in a whole range of areas is indicate that we care about disability, whether it's sponsoring the Technology for Good Awards, whether it's signing up, as we did last year, 10,000 employees to be dementia friends, which is training in how to recognise dementia and how to help people with dementia in a very practical way, or in sponsoring disabled sport. We were a main sponsor of the London 2012 Paralympics and the more recent Invictus Games. But we've been sponsoring disabled sport and people with disabilities who want to be sportsmen for over 25 years, and we feel it's a very important thing for us to do, and it's something we're very proud of. So, to round off, we believe that employers can be an important actor in this space. We would go further in that, and we would venture that employers should be an important actor in this space. But if we are to get employers to embrace the concept of disability, then we have to work with them, we have to talk in their language, and we have to help them realise how, if you focus on people with disabilities, you can be commercially successful. You can harness the power of a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity, and that can help you make you a better business, and I would hope also part of a better society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I think very important what you say is that the need to speak to the business so they hear. And I think at the end of the day, you know, businesses should and would like to look like the customers. And if we talk about the number of people that acquire disabilities in the society, it's only right that the companies embrace that. And I'm very impressed, because it's not often that I see a very robust monitoring activities, which are, I think, very important. So that's great to see. I would say thank you very much. I did thoroughly enjoy very different and very complementary presentations. I would say we have about 15 to 20 minutes for a discussion, some questions. I see already one person at the end that would like to take a floor, but my question now to a representative of the presidency, because you remember we didn't get a chance to hear from the second session, and Mr. Mamoika did write a summary when part of it will be read out now. Please.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mamoika has done the hard job and prepared the notes of the session, but we have the honor to read them out on behalf of him. The notes will, of course, be included in the conference materials, so I will make them a bit shorter for now to leave time for the discussion. So the parallel work session one was on the issue from inclusive education to employment. And there were 4 presenters in the session, and let me shortly summarize it. Mr. Pat Clark from Down Syndrome Ireland, was informing that the organization can provide support and knowledge not only to parents and families concerned, but also provide valuable opinion and evaluations to policymakers who decide about and sometimes also design new measures. He described the situation in Ireland thoroughly, and people with disabilities are only underlining that people with disabilities are only half as likely to be in employment as others of working age. What is needed for people with disabilities when it comes to work? For those born with a disability, quality education and training and good bridges from education and training into the world of work are key to getting on a job and career ladder. For those who acquire a disability during their working life, they need support to re-enter the workforce, either returning to their old job or being retained for another position. Ireland does have a strong legislative disability infrastructure. Important is the National Disability Strategy. However, comprehensive employment strategy implemented as a specialist service is unsatisfactorily integrated in the mainstream. A large contribution towards the implementation of the high-level goals contained in the strategy comes from the voluntary sector. Then, two examples were mentioned: Walk Peer program that focuses on supporting young people at an early stage to gain access to the same employment opportunities as their mainstream peers, and the National Council for the Blind of Ireland Employment Services, which provides assistive technology assessments, mobility training, and other potential supports that assist in keeping a job advice to employers and employees regarding retention advice, awareness, and reintegration. Then there was an example from Finland in the workshop. Miss Tiina Mäki-Getz and Satu Kataja from Validia Vocational College who were invited to present the vocational college experience and suggestions on best measures, described the experience of their college. It provides an accessible learning environment through several complex structure of services and activities, like grounds for special needs education, student support services, support for transition from school to the labor market, choice of the right profession, career guidance to support employment process before, during, and after studies, on-job training period, self-evaluation and on-job evaluation, job analysis, network cooperation with employers, insurance companies, associations for people with disabilities, students, hometown social workers, and etc. Best practices and good experience is particular concerning networking with employers and indolent of students. Then it was mentioned even in this session, there was Fundación ADECO with Mr. David Morales presenting their experience as regards successful programs for youth with disability. As it was already said, it is a multinational company with about 31,000 employees and provide employment to more than 600,000 of people. Its task is also to help companies to get suitable employees for requested jobs. They concentrate on three vulnerable groups: disabled people, people with family responsibilities and gender victims, and older unemployed people. Mr. Morales presented programs for disabled persons and potential employers, ranging from awareness improvement, job preparation, up to inclusion in leisure activities. He informed about difficulties to find high-qualified people with disabilities, but also about program for employment in tourism, people with mental disabilities. And the last one presenter was Miss Ulrike Rebhandel from Austria, and it was the government representative. In Austria, Federal Ministry is responsible for vocational rehabilitation and regional ministries for social rehabilitation. The system consists from the following 5 measures: youth coaching, production school, vocational training assistance, work assistance, and job coaching. And then participation in this system is voluntary and free of charge to support independent life of disabled people. If the main reason for choice of job is personal motivation and willingness of the disabled persons, and the choice occurs unsuitable after some time, what will happen? The answer was that the new study or requalification is and should be available. In many countries, youth guarantee to be trainee in an enterprise is only up to 6 months. And disabled persons sometimes need more than only those 6 months. Employment of disabled person is benefit for a company, for its social profile, atmosphere in company, and social contact, even if work productivity is lower. In outline of the parallel session, there were few questions. Are countries comparable? I'm coming to the end. Are countries comparable, and is the best practice transferable? And Mr. Momoika tells that differences exist, draws his conclusion that differences exist mainly in legislation. At least some different solutions are needed temporarily. And can appropriate career guidance and choice of the right profession secure stable future prospects for children with disabilities? And the conclusion of Mr. Momoika was partly yes, but much more is needed, in particular concerning attitude of employers, co-workers, and whole society. If I may add one conclusion from the other session, we draw the conclusion that we go to schools not only to get a job in the future. I think it can be referred also here that we work not only because to receive a salary, it's much more in it. And some of the questions were already answered by the presenters, and that's the end of the session. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the rapporteur. And I think that goes very much in line with what Luke was saying, that it's not just a mean to get a salary, but it's something that very much it's part of identity of everyone, including people with disabilities. I see 2 hands, 2 questions. I will take one at the end and one here, a gentleman. And please introduce yourself, and if you have a question, indicate the question to whom. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. My name is Marek Plura. I am member of European Parliament. First of all, I would like to congratulate the Latvian presidency for organizing this important event. I am honored that I can be here and represent the European Parliament. As a member of the Committee for Employment and Social Affairs of the European Parliament, I would like to raise 2 questions. Those are related both to today's workshop and the topics discussed yesterday: education and making full use of citizen rights by persons with disabilities. The first issue is supporting the mobility of persons with disabilities through the introduction of European Disability Card. This card would make it possible for disabled people to access all kinds of conveniences available in various countries. It will facilitate transport, access to culture, to education, and to work abroad. I am convinced that this card could be a success, just like the European road card or the parking card. This is why I would like to encourage both the presidency and the representatives of various institutions and organizations gathered here to take action on every level to support the quick introduction to the European Disability Card. The second question concerns the equipment of disabled person with adequate skills which would improve their chance on the labor market. As the author of the report Skills Policies to Combat Youth Unemployment, I would like to stress that the lack of adequate skills among the people entering the labor market, but also among employment and recruitment services, is an important factor behind the alarming level of unemployment. This question is of particularly importance when we talk about underprivileged groups, including people with disabilities. Allowing this group of people to fully explore their potential will benefit all of Europe. It is necessary to grant those people adequate, tailored counseling and training from the very beginning of their disability, and to future utilize new technologies in order to make opportunities more equal. Moreover, it is very important to better prepare employment service and employers themselves to recruit disabled workers and allow them satisfactory career. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think, again, the importance of capacity within the public employment services is key. I have a gentleman here on this side, please.
Hello, my name's Roger Wicks. I represent an organisation called Action on Hearing Loss in the UK. I've got a brief point to make and then a question to the panel on the importance of people who develop a health condition or a disability in work being able to remain employed. So throughout the EU, we have an ageing population, as Paul Litchfield said, but because of the raising retirement age in many states, we also have an ageing workforce. We published a research report last year called Hidden Disadvantage, where we spoke to 1,000 people in the workplace with hearing loss about their experiences when they acquired hearing loss in the workplace. And we found that 74% of people said that their employment opportunities were limited because of their hearing loss in the workplace. And a quite devastating finding, we found that 41% of respondents who retired early said they did so because of their hearing loss. Now that's a devastating finding for the employee, for employees themselves, but also for employers and also society more broadly. And I think it represents a direct challenge to the aims of the EU Disability Strategy too. Clearly the solutions are multifaceted. There'll be solutions for around the employee, the employer, the state and the market. But given, this is my question, but given change can't happen overnight, and given too that we need to focus finite resources, where do the speakers suggest that we focus to ensure that people who develop a health condition or disability in work are best able to stay employed?
Thank you very much. I think I could take maybe one more point or a question if I see, and if not, because everyone is ready for a coffee break, which is due. I don't know if there is anyone from the panel that would like to address the question of retention. Paul and Luke. And Henry.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more about the importance of keeping people in employment. It's important for the individual because clearly if you're doing something you've done for a considerable time, you've got expertise there, you understand the organisation, you're going to be better at that than being thrown onto the labour market and trying to find something different. It's also better for the employer because in that time you've built up a lot of skills, a lot of experience that the employer will otherwise use. And what we find is that most of the time what you need to do to keep people in work is relatively simple. and it doesn't cost very much money. What tends to, when it does go wrong, it tends to be that you're trying to do the right thing, but you just take too long about it. And that's one of the reasons we set up this hub that I was describing of a small central group that coordinate access to services. And what we've done there is we've radically reduced the amount of time it takes between the initial request for a support service or a piece of adaptive technology and its provision. We were in the stage at one point where it was taking months and months and months to get something as simple as a non-auditory alarm for people to have with them when the fire alarm in the building went off, so they knew that there was something going on. So we've managed to reduce that by the simple provision of a small central service that will help people to do that. So I think it's the right thing to do. I think there are mutual benefits, and it's not usually not wanting to do it. It's usually the bureaucracy of any large organisation that gets in the way.
2 points, if you allow me. First of all, a remark with regard to what was mentioned by the MEP. Indeed, employment services play a crucial role. Tailored counselling is absolutely essential. We have data available saying that if just one little point, if the gap between between education, vocational education and training, and employment is more than 6 months, the chances to get somebody in employment are going down dramatically. So it's absolutely crucial that we have a very good match there to avoid that people end up in unemployment. With regard to technology, technology can bring us a lot of solutions. There is one little risk. We should not focus too much on the risk citing because technology can help us a lot. But there is one little risk. I hear more and more people advocating for work at home thanks to technology. That means that we cut off a very important element of what a job means for many of us. That is a social network, contact with people, leaving your home, being part of a society, belonging to another group than your normal family surrounding. So there is a little risk there, and we should keep an eye on that. With regard to disabilities developed during our life, most of us will, sooner or later. And hearing loss is part of that, but there are many other elements, I think. Here, again, just 2 points. Let's try to look at prevention as well. We live in when it comes to hearing loss, we live in a very noisy society. We should look at prevention as much as possible, I think. Second element was tackled already by my neighbor. We can look at solutions through IT, but we also can modify working processes. There are many, many opportunities. When you look at how the work is organized, by restructuring that, we can bypass many, many problems. It's about looking in a smart way at the different tasks and try to put them together in a comprehensive and in a package that replies to the abilities of a person. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last word, Henry.
I'll make it very brief because I think much has already been said. But let me just say a couple of things. I think it's an extremely pertinent question, and I think it's certainly also a question that increasingly is coming up. And I mean, also within our network, I mean, it's something that we are seeing increasingly coming up. Let me just refer back to the presentation I made with the first publication we did with company practices. One of the key elements that we have been focusing on in all the case studies, that was about hiring and retention. And within that element of retention, that is also about people acquiring a disability or coming into such a situation, I mean, within their career. So, I mean, it's something that, although not to a great level of detail, but I mean, that is already documented within that. Within the network, I mean, just to focus on that, because I couldn't agree more with than with the two previous who were responding to this. I think it's also an element that is important within the request that has been coming to our network in terms of mental health. I know, I mean, hearing loss is not a mental health issue, but I mean, there are a range of, as Luc was also saying, I mean, this is something that comes out in a range of different forms of disabilities, and mental health is actually one of those. I mean, people come into stress-like situations and are incapacitated, I mean, for shorter or longer periods of time. People come in burnout situation, or there can be other mental health situations that come, I mean, in a professional career. And this is something that business, certainly also for their own sake, need to increasingly deal with in a better manner. Because, I mean, in many instances, I mean, we're having very professional staff, very capable staff, technically highly qualified staff and specialized staff. And there's also that whole factor of not wanting to lose, I mean, such people. So I think it's a subject that is coming into the agenda. I think it's something that certainly merits coming more into the agenda, because, I mean, I think there's a range of aspects around this that is certainly also very beneficial for the business to seek to tackle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, I mean, I couldn't agree with more. I think the smooth transitions from any mode, from education to work, from disability to adaptation is very important. And I think what has been said, adapting or adjusting not only the person but also the workplace and the modes of employment is important. And with that, I don't see any more questions. I would like you to join me in thanking our excellent panel. I think they have spoke about different things in a very interesting and an engaging way. And I think we get back here at the same time as stated in the program at or more or less I hear from the IC, so maybe we can accommodate 5 more minutes. Thank you very much.